everybody, and welcome to Virtual Trek Con with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
This is the pitch panel, or the writers pitching panel. These are all people that have pitched to Star Trek very many times unsuccessfully, like everybody else, and oftentimes successfully. And we are joined with Mr. Ethan Calk, Toni Marberry, Mr. Jack Trevino, Steve Fratt, and Mr. Marc Zicree. My name's Ryan T. Husk. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Awesome. Awesome.
Great.
Doing great. Thank you.
So
I've got a real question right off the bat.
let's do it, because this is going to be a fun one. Let's do it.
When is the last time, because I think writing is a personal thing, when is the last time you've gotten together with a group of other writers?
Oh.
Probably not this year.
Not this year, no.
Not this year. Well, definitely not this year. So, but I'm glad that you guys are together, and we can really benefit from the experience that all of you have. I mean, you've written some of our favorite episodes, and I've worked alongside some of you, and it's just been, it's a pleasure to have you guys here and talk about the pitch and writing. Even the methodology and how you guys arrive at your thoughts and your creative ideas.
So let's start off going around the table. Looks like we missed Mr. Marc Zicree. He's also known as Mr. Sci-Fi, so he kind of just goes in and out of time.
He's in and out.
But maybe you guys can introduce yourselves very quickly and tell us your favorite Star Trek series. We'll start with Mr. Jack Trevino.
How you doing? Favorite Star Trek series has to be the original. Everything else came after that. So, the thing about the original series is you can sit down and watch them over and over and over again, and they never grow old. Mm. So the topics were always controversial and current, even in today's world. So for me, it's the TOS.
What about you, Ethan Calk?
I think it kind of varies depending on the episode, because there's some episodes in all the series that I go, oh, and then there's some that are just awesome, and you go, oh wow, I love this, and I want to watch more Voyager, I want to watch more Enterprise. I probably though Deep Space Nine, because I have that small tiny connection with it.
Mm-hmm. Steve Fratt, do you have a favorite?
Well, actually, I'm gonna echo what JT had just said, and you got to go with the original. I mean, how do you not? But I will say that a close second for me is Star Trek Voyager. Mm. That was I like all the characters so much. I think Janeway was the best captain out of all the Star Trek series.
Wow.
Love the Doctor, and just absolutely love a lot of the stories. So, yeah.
Toni, do you have a favorite?
I do. Well, I grew up with the original. I remember watching it. I was very young. I think I'm going to have to go with Deep Space Nine, and not because I, actually sold with Jack, but because I always wondered, well, what happened to those people, after they, went on their merry way. And I like Deep Space Nine because a lot of those consequences of previous episodes you got to see. So I'll have to go with Deep Space Nine for that reason.
Awesome. And Jack, you and Toni are writing partners, is that right?
We were, yeah, for a while.
I've actually written with all these guys except for Marc Zicree.
No way. And you, Jack, the two story ideas that you sold, were those with Toni?
Yes.
Great. And those were, if I remember correctly, Little Green Men, which is a huge fan favorite, Little Green Men, and Indiscretion. Yeah. And Ethan, if I remember correctly, and by remembering correctly, I mean I just glanced at my notes, you also had a couple picked up by Deep Space Nine, Visionary and Children of Time. You came and joined us already. to review one of those already. Now, Mr. Steve Fratt, you said you'd never actually sold one, but you pitched like 100 times to 4 different Star Trek series. Is that right?
Okay, everybody. So
you have to be doing something right for that to happen.
The stories I could tell you about why I pitched so many times, unbelievable. I mean, I was telling Jack recently I should write a book about this because the experiences were just so diverse and so all over the place. But yeah, you're looking at the person who pitched the most to Star Trek without ever selling a story. That's the distinction that I have. Although the caveat to that is that Jack and I achieved credits on a Star Trek episode, Star Trek Continues. So
I saw that you actually were credited as to writing the first episode of Star Trek Continues, right?
Pilgrim of Eternity, yes.
That's a great one.
So
great idea. Apollo coming back, whatever it was, 50 years later. So
what's that like? I mean, pitching and then not getting it and then coming back and pitching some more.
Cirroc, I can't, it's, first of all, the fact that they kept inviting me back in and of itself is mind-boggling because usually if you don't, you probably know this, if you don't sell something after a couple of pitches, they usually say goodbye. But for whatever reason, they kept asking me to come back and I went back and each time I was shut down, you know, I decided to just get back up, pull the bootstraps back up and go for it again. There were times where I almost said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. Kept hammering away at it. So came very close, Jack and I, very, very close to selling an episode to Enterprise in their final season. Jack, why don't you elaborate on that for a moment?
Well, that's when they tried to embrace the connection with original Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
And we pitched a story that dealt with the probe Tanru before it collided with Nomad. And the Enterprise and Archer encounter this probe, and it was a Hoshi story. It was all about communications. And Andre Bormanis liked it a lot. And in fact, he wanted to write the script. And we were like, hey, Steve, we got it. And then I read an article that UPN was cutting from 26 to 22 episodes. And I said, uh-oh, there goes our episode.
You were episode number 23, man.
Yeah. And that's what happened. We got cut.
Wow.
But we were that close to having our names on an Enterprise episode.
Wow.
Toni or Ethan, do either of you have any times where you thought for sure you sold one, or you thought this one had a really good chance and it just didn't quite happen for whatever reason?
I know with me and Jack, we pitched one with Molly, something up with Molly, right. And what was it, Brian Jack that liked it, but they ended up going with Ira Stephen Bear's version, and we were just really bummed about that one because we really thought that had really good potential, and I think we kind of pitched as a two-parter, and you know, something where, you know, a lot of stuff's wrapped up and, you know, something's going to happen to the character and then they'll be fine. This one, she wasn't fine. So we thought that might be the hook that grabbed them, but no, it didn't go.
You know, actually, Jack told me a little bit about this ahead of time. Can you guys tell us about the story a little bit? Because I think Cirroc might be a little interested in hearing about this one.
Yeah, my God, you're right. Jake was a crucial part of that. Thank you. Yeah, we pitched a story kind of where, you know, Miles always is leaving tools out, and Keiko's always kind of like, you know, hey, you know, you work with dangerous stuff. Well, one of her things does something to Molly and causes her to age. And So Keiko feels guilty and wants her to be fixed back to her little girl. But while she's a young adult, she kind of skips over childhood. Well, her and Jake kind of bond where she actually kind of falls in love with Jake, and the whole episode they're trying to fix her and they don't. And so, Jake and her kind of have a relationship, and later on down the line, we hope that at some point, they get through Jake saying, she needs childhood, she needs to grow and everything, because, she's saying, I love you, Jake. But later on, when they find a way to bring her back, the very end of the show is a little Molly going, I love you, Jake. But it's like with a different connotation because she's back to a child. And I just really thought that was really a cool one for, his character and Molly, and just kind of the surprising thing of, oh, wow, they didn't fix that in an hour, that kind of thing. But that wasn't the direction they went in. But I mean, for me, they could have left her as an adult or bring her back, as a child at the very end, like they had, kind of written or pitched.
Yeah, because the relationships, the dynamics of everybody changed. So Miles O'Brien was, Jake would babysit Molly all the time, but now he was the father that was looking after his daughter. And so, and the same with Keiko, but Miles, took it, a little bit harder.
Right. Wow.
Cirroc, actually, that's really close to an idea I pitched them about Jadzia Dax getting 10 years younger and dating you.
Wow.
Wow, Jake's a ladies' man.
I love these episodes. I mean, these are great. Anybody have an episode with the attendant dating?
I knew you were going to say that.
I just had to throw that out there. No, that's pretty remarkable. Actually, I like hearing these stories because some of these stories, even though they didn't get made, you can almost picture them in your head, and it's like
totally.
You know what I mean? It's like a missing puzzle piece to something that you didn't even know about. And I really like hearing these kinds of different ideas that didn't make it.
Right. Yeah, and Jake and Molly were going to go on a date, and Miles was kind of like stalking them.
Yeah.
What's he doing with her?
Yeah.
Take it easy.
Just take it easy. She's an adult. No, she's not. She's my baby.
Yeah. She's my little girl.
Oh, wow. That's a great episode.
A lot of times when we hear stuff like this, it's absolutely like it could have happened. Just because they didn't have enough episodes in the season or just because they didn't finance it, it's absolutely something that could have happened. For all we know, that did happen in between episode 16 and 17, for example. And I wanted to ask you, Steve, was there specifically one or two episodes that you still kind of in your mind, you say, no, I don't care what they say, that happened, that was too perfect?
You mean episodes that they made or stuff that I had pitched?
Stuff that you'd pitched.
Oh.
Out of the 300 or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, where do I begin? I will say that what I actually wrote a spec script for DS9. So it wasn't part of the normal pitching process that I went through. It was a spec script that I spent a lot of time on, wrote, sent it in, I think in the, towards the end of the first season. And it was a great story about Miles O'Brien. And at the time, I don't know if any of you remember the timeline on this, but at the time, it seemed as if a popular story was organ transplants and people receiving an organ transplant from somebody else, somebody who died perhaps in a car accident. And the person who received the organ was actually starting to take on and sense some of the elements of the person they got the organ from.
Yeah.
So I pitched a story that dealt with something along those lines, and it revolved around O'Brien, and it was I thought a very good story. I thought they were going to buy it, but never happened.
Wow. Marc Zicree's back, and we hear you and see you great. Your internet's working. So
I'm doing.
Mark
Yes.
wrote, he pitched and got picked up 2 really cool episodes. One was Far Beyond the Stars of Deep Space Nine that everybody knows and loves.
Yes.
Also one for Next Generation that I still think is totally underrated, which was First Contact, where Riker's a Malkorian and has like all these different organs than the actual Malkorians.
Yes.
Mark, did you pitch a lot of times, or did you just happen to hit 2 home runs out of 2 swings?
No, and what happened was I pitched many times, and there, I would always, the producer would always want to buy 1 or 2 of the pitches, and they would be fired before they could. And this happened over and over. It happened with David Gerald. It happened with, I mean, like 4 or 5 times. And
were they fired because they took your ideas?
I don't think it was cause and effect, but I can't say for sure.
That was a great episode.
But, I mean, it was Tracy Torme was another one of them, and on and on. So, and I actually had one of the weirder pitching experiences I had ever had in my career, because by the time I was pitching to Star Trek, I'd already sold dozens of scripts and many, many shows, and so I was an old hand. And the weirdest one was, it was Bob, God, what was his name? He had been on the original show, and then he became a producer on Next Gen early on, I think Robert Justman. And he really liked me, and he really liked my pitches, but for various reasons, none of them could be done. And so he started saying, well, how about this one? And he started working up, he took a thread of one of my ideas, and he started building it up, and I was put in a very interesting position, because I probably would have gone a different direction. But I realized that beat for beat, what he was pitching back to me, which he would have bought from me, and I would have had an assignment, was Requiem for Methuselah, which was an original Star Trek episode about an immortal guy. And I just was, as he was telling me this, very enthusiastically, and I was, it was a definite sale. I decided to be ethical and say, well, I'm sorry, Bob, but that's actually an episode that was done on Star Trek. And so I talked myself out of the sale. I think if I could go back in time, I would have changed that equation and just said, sounds great, let's do it. And, so then I went in a number of times, and I would just generate a ton of, I'd work up, whenever I went in, I would set aside 2 weeks solid to work up the pitch, and I would generate about 100 ideas, and then I would boil it down to 5 completely structured beginning, middle, and end storylines, and then a paragraph for a number more, and then like thumbnails. And I just, but the challenge with Trek was you had to, at least as I viewed it, was that you had to come up with something they had never done before that had a profound meaning to it. And so that was great. It was a great challenge. And so, as you said, the 2 that I came up with were ones that Star Trek had never done before. One where a culture reaches, develops warp drive, and the prime directive goes off, and the Enterprise is sent to make first contact. And the other one was, of course, Far Beyond the Stars, which was where we went into the world of the science fiction writers of the 50s. And the latter was very much influenced by Theodore Sturgeon, who had been a mentor of mine, and Harlan Ellison, both of whom wrote during that era. And I really wanted to show that period. And it became, of course, a spectacular episode. But I generated, God, hundreds of storylines. And I recently came upon a thick manila folder, at least 200 pages, and it was all these ideas and outlines and all sorts of stuff that I'd come up with for all of the Star Trek series, from Next Gen all the way through I think Enterprise. And
wow.
So on the recent Kickstarter campaign for Space Command, we actually had that as a perk where you could get a copy of all that material, because it was Data stories and Riker stories and Picard stories and everybody, Worf, you name it, B'Elanna Torres, And so it was very, so that would be a real, journey through my brain. And I was bound and determined to sell to Star Trek, because that was the show that made me want to be a writer in the first place. And so I just kept hitting that ball until something connected and flew out of the park.
Right.
But, yeah,
really cool.
That was quite a journey. But I got to know all of those writers extremely well. And it turned out that after I pitched to Next Gen, Michael Piller and I discovered that we were second cousins, which we hadn't known at the time.
Wow.
But my grandmother was Agnes Piller, and I have an Aunt Yoli Piller, and one time we were over at her house, and she said, yeah, Michael was just over here. I said, Michael Piller? She said, yeah, he's on Star Trek. It's like, oh, okay. So then
He's on Star Trek. Have you heard of it?
and Michael and I got together for lunch and had a very, very nice time. And we had talked, we talked ever since then. He died far too young, of course.
Right.
So, but he was certainly a visionary and really trained up all of those writers to be showrunners. They're all showrunners now. And
Right.
that was because
Mark, you mentioned something about preparation and how you took 100 ideas, turned it down to 5 stories, and then you had bullet points and paragraphs. And I wanted to ask everybody else if about their preparation and like how much time did you have to prepare for a pitch? I mean, did you know 2 weeks in advance? Did you get the calls, the day before? Like, how was that like?
Yeah. Ethan?
Jack?
Oh,
Or
Jack.
Ethan? Yeah.
Steve? Tony. No, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, go, Jack.
Me first? Well, Toni had the contacts over there because she and her previous writing partner had sold a concept that they used in a Next Generation episode called The Next Phase, where Geordi was out of phase and Ensign Rowe, they thought they were dead. They
Yeah, that was a fun one.
So she was in the system, but she said that we would pitch on Thursday afternoons at 5. I'm sorry, at 7, excuse me. It was 5 o'clock in LA time. And she had an extension, phone, and we would just get on the phone and they would call and they'd introduce themselves and then they'd say, what do you got? Well, you got 30 minutes. And they would tell us, 3, no more than 5 ideas. And they'd always say, you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so we got a number of different writers, but one time she covered the phone and she said, it's Michael Piller. You take it. No, you take it. But he was good. I mean, we pitched a story and he would be, that reminds me of an Outer Limits or Twilight Zone season 3, episode 21. And damn, he was right. That's where I had gotten the idea from. But I wanted to expand on it, but he was good. But he was really cool because he said, you got any more? Keep going. And I think one time we pitched like 12 stories to him.
Oh yeah, we had a lot, but we had, you whittled it down to your best 5. But if they were like, you got anything else? We had something in the chute ready to go if they wanted to hear it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it was interesting when I pitched First Contact. The way that worked was they had me in the day before Thanksgiving at 5 p.m. And I went in and it was Michael Piller's office and he was there behind his big desk and everyone on the writing staff was there, every single writer. So it was Ron Moore, everybody, Brandon Braga, and nobody wanted to be there. It was 5 o'clock the day before Thanksgiving. Everyone wanted to be gone. And I for some reason, they were all sitting and I was standing. They were sitting on a couple of sofas. And I mean, literally, it must have been like 15 guys. And so I just started pitching. I was standing in the middle of them like a gladiator in the arena. And it was fascinating because I started pitching and they liked what I was pitching, but for various reasons they couldn't use anything. And so they said, keep going, like with you. And I just kept going and they just said, keep going. And at one point Ira Bear said, God, this guy's an idea machine. We should lock him in the room and just have him slide paper out. And finally I got down to the one-liners. And I'd never pitched those in my life to any show before, but it was like I was going down my list from the fully worked out ones to the semi-worked out ones to the like one-liners. And I just said, you've done stories with the Prime Directive where we were able to deal with other races like the Romulans and the Vulcans and the Klingons. And then you have the Prime Directive where you have all these races you can't reveal yourself to, but you've never done a story where the Prime Directive switches off and the Enterprise is sent to make first contact. And everybody's eyes lit up, and we started talking about it. We all agreed that basically it would be day the Earth stood still, except that the flying saucer that lands on the White House lawn is, the Enterprise, basically, not landing, of course, but it was the idea that our guys would be the aliens, and this race would be like, modern day us. And so they said, I think you've got a sale. We have to clear it by, the studio, but yeah, and. So in my memory, it was the next day they called and said, we're buying it. But I think it must have been after the Thanksgiving weekend. And but either way, we were off and running. And the moment I said that, I knew that it was a sale simply because it was so different from anything they'd ever done. it's so challenging to come up with something that works within the Star Trek mythology, but opens it up, widens it. And of course, as they did more and more series, you had to be conversant with every episode they'd done and even what they had in development. And so we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of stories. And then when I sold DS9, hang on a second, when I sold DS9, Far Beyond the Stars, that was a completely different experience because I pitched it to Hans Beimler, who'd been my boss on another show called Beyond Reality, where I was executive story editor. He and Ricky Manning were my bosses. And I pitched it to Hans, and he really, really liked it. And it took him a year to convince Ira Bear to buy it. And so by then I was a producer on Sliders. So I was sitting in my office at Universal, and the phone rang, and Hans said, "I've got good news for you. We're buying Far Beyond the Stars." And I said, "Oh, great timing, Hans," because I was writing 2 episodes of Sliders back to back. Yeah. And the only time I could even meet with the writing staff was during my lunch hour, I drove over the hill to Nicodell's, which was a restaurant next to Paramount. And it was the entire writing staff. It was everybody. Ron Moore and I think Brian Fuller was there at that point, and everybody. And we just batted out the story beats there at lunch. And then that weekend I wrote the outline. Interesting side note is, because I wanted to get the details right and I knew a lot about that period, I actually, while I was writing the outline, I called Harlan Ellison. And of course, he was incredibly embittered against Star Trek, but we were friends. And I just asked him a whole bunch of questions. And particularly one question I asked him was, I said, were there any black writers writing under white pseudonyms in science fiction at that time? And he said, not in science fiction, he said, but there was a writer named Frank Yerby, who was a mainstream writer, who was a black guy, but no one knew it. He was writing as a white guy. You never saw his photo on the books that he wrote. And I thought, yeah, but I found it very gracious of Harlan to be so forthcoming with information and so willing to let me ask him questions when he really, really, really hated Star Trek because of the experience he'd had with City on the Edge of Forever. And then, of course, the other postscript to that is I then did, World Enough in Time for Star Trek New Voyages and got to do the ultimate Sulu story. And again, that was an unexpected treat and a great joy.
Right. Now, we almost forgot, but you, Ethan and Steve are not off the hook yet because I still want to hear the answers to the question that Cirroc had. And it's funny that Cirroc turned it to the panel because when Mark first mentioned his preparation and all that, I actually wanted to ask you, Cirroc, directly that same question. But first, we'll get it from Ethan and then Steve. What do you do to prepare? Did you start with 100, whittle it down? Do you have just a bunch of scribbled notes?
Personally, I was not quite the idea factory that the other guys here are. I mean, I would have maybe 10 instead of 100. That I would just, again, whittle down to maybe 5 really good ones. And my first pitch, I had it really, really detailed. And then I walk into the office, he said, "Oh, just give me the quick beginning, middle, and end." So I had to really shift gears on that first try like that. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't as proficient, or that's not the right word, but I didn't have as many ideas as you guys had, but I guess 2 of them were good enough. So,
great.
Yep. Sounds like it was more about detail than quantity.
Yeah, it could be. That was the first pitch. After that, I kind of figured out, okay, now I know what they want, and so it was a little easier to prepare. But I think we would schedule maybe a week or 2 in advance when they would do that, and so you would again. It was the Thursday at 7 here in Texas, and so we would be able to have a couple of weeks to get ready and figure it out. And then, of course, the nerves start just before, an hour before. And you're trembling until that phone rings. And then once the phone rings and they answer, okay, now I'm okay.
Right. What about you, Steve? You had an enormous amount of ideas over the course of like 15 years.
Great question, Ryan. I think
it was Cirroc's question technically, but
thank you. You deserve credit, Ryan.
Thank
Re-asking the question.
Let's divvy up credits.
Yes.
No, I mean, every Star Trek fan has ideas, right, for new stories. So, and I would just jot them down and see which ones would keep going, and then which ones stopped pretty quick, and then the ones that kept going are the ones that I developed. And I lived in LA for 7 years, so most of the time I went in and pitched directly and not over the phone. I have some unbelievable stories from those experiences, going in and pitching directly to so many different people. And not to change subjects and to edit this real quick, but I want to piggyback on something Mark said and Jack about Michael Piller. Michael Piller was what Star Trek was all about, and what I wish Hollywood and Star Trek was still like. That was the type of guy that enjoyed bringing in freelance writers and freelance ideas. And if you had a great idea, boom, he was gonna compensate you for it and maybe let you develop it, or he'd develop it. But he was very, very open to outside people and not just keeping everything in house, which it seems like that's where Hollywood is at now.
Yes. Well, he had made his bones. He wrote a spec, Simon and Simon, and that got read and bought and brought him into television. And so when he came aboard Star Trek: The Next Generation, he had an open door policy where they would read spec Star Trek scripts. There was no other show on the air that was doing that. When I was on Sliders, Universal specifically said to us, we are not allowed to read spec Slider scripts because of the liabilities. And it was interesting because when I did First Contact, like a day or two after it aired, one of the assistants in the Star Trek office called me, and they said, "Were you ever a judge on a Writer's Digest screenwriting contest?" And I said, "No." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, there's someone who's claiming that you ripped off their script, and who submitted it to Writer's Digest." And I said, well, but then, and this is, I think, when Next Gen was on and DS9 was on, and they were prepping Voyager, and I said to the assistant, I said, how many of all the Star Trek episodes get plagiarism suits? And he said, all of them. Every single episode was sued. And so that was the danger, of course. And but Michael Piller allowed that possibility, and Ron Moore came in that way. Many of the writers who became major writers on Star Trek and great showrunners came in over the transom that way. And Ron Moore told me that he worked to get an opportunity to go on set when Next Gen was up and running. And he said, I wasn't going to go on that set without a script under my arm, a Star Trek script. And that's what got him, read and on staff. And so, yes, it was unlike any other show at the time. And now, of course, they don't even have freelance pitches anymore. They just hire 24 writers, decide that half of them can't write the show, and they just sit out their turn, writing their spec pilots and screenplays while the other half is actually writing the show. It's a very bad system and wasteful of money, wasteful of time. And it doesn't allow fresh talent to come in. Whereas when I was in TV, back in the day, we'd have freelancers come in every single day for pitches. And that was a great opportunity to give people a chance, So, yeah.
Hollywood used to be a big creative think tank, whereas now it's more of a structured business.
Yeah, it's an echo chamber. It's like a closed environment where they're just really not open to. I haven't heard of any shows that are taking open pitches, script ideas or pitches or anything at all.
No, not.
Cirroc, as far as I know, for sure, you've pitched at least 2 Star Trek ideas. One was you pitched a Deep Space Nine episode, and another one was you pitched an animated series, right? Did you ever have any other ideas, or was it just it started with 2 and ended with 2 and you were done with it?
Yeah, I pitched my ideas and I created my ideas for very selfish reasons. So let me first identify that. The first idea I had, which was, I was trying to get Michael Jordan on Star Trek as the big Michael Jordan fan. So I actually reverse engineered. I worked backwards from there. How do I get Michael Jordan on Star Trek? And that's when I wrote a script, to kind of get that accomplished. And I had a chance to pitch that idea for Ira and the writers, which was very nerve-wracking, like just to kind of, agree with what you're saying about the nerves kind of kicking in. These are guys that I've had seen already at that point. We'd worked alongside each other for 4 or 5 years at that point, but the nerves kicked in when it was a completely different thing that I was doing. It wasn't the acting. This is now I'm going to the writing, and I have to be kind of respected as a writer. And I was nervous about how the pitch would go. I did way too much preparation because I actually wrote the script. I wrote the whole thing. Took me, I would say 2-3 weeks to just write everything out. And it was unexpected. So they had no idea I was coming. I just called one day and said, hey, I got this script I finished. And would you guys, give me a chance to pitch it? So that was my experience. And it was all, like I said, very selfishly to get Michael Jordan on the set and have him in an episode, which was why they didn't pick it up for one reason. They said they couldn't afford to get Michael Jordan. So that was part of the reason why they turned it down. The other was what Mark was saying, that it had elements of it that were too much like other Star Trek episodes. And me not knowing all the Star Trek episodes, I didn't have the references to say, oh yeah, you're right, or let me alter this because that's too similar to the second season of Next Generation or whatnot. So that was that. And the other thing was the animated series. And that wasn't so selfish. That was my good friend, my best friend growing up, who was a very good artist and animator. Actually turned out to work for the studios as an animator. But he wanted to reboot the Star Trek animated series. He was working with a Japanese animation company that wanted to also fund this idea. So I essentially had funding lined up. I had the artists lined up, and all we needed was,
everything else.
Everything else, right? Which was basically Star Trek's approval. And so we met with Rick. I actually didn't pitch that to the writers. I pitched that directly to Rick and said, hey, Rick, Hanna-Barbera and this company working together. Are you interested in bringing back the animated series? And it would have been the actual academy. So it was Star Trek, the Academy. It was about them being in the Academy.
Who was it? Like, what characters was it? All new characters or some that we
all new characters?
Oh, cool.
All new characters that he had drawn out, and we had whole sketches for made, and he knew a lot about Star Trek. My friend Damon knew more about Star Trek than I did, so he had all of this stuff really laid out. And but it didn't go anywhere. Rick wasn't interested at the time. They were actually dismantling the franchise at that time. So they were selling sets and, closing down sound stages. So it wasn't really the best time to be trying to do that. But, that's just how it went for me. But like I was telling you guys before we started rolling, I do have a tremendous amount of respect for the craft and the ability to come up with these ideas. And when you make these kinds of ideas, are you really interested about telling some kind of other message? Because sometimes we get those things, like, for example, in Far Beyond the Stars with racism. And are those other messages also the things that you want to tell, or is it more just the story takes you there and that's just kind of what happens?
Well, my goal, I grew up, Star Trek, the original Star Trek debuted when I was 10. And so it really, I was like a bonsai tree that it bent me into the shape I've been in ever since, it's like, and so it had a huge formative influence on me. And I loved City on the Edge of Forever. There are many episodes I loved. Amok Time, the Ted Sturgeon one. Ted became a very good friend and mentor. But my goal wasn't just to sell the Star Trek. My goal was to do one of the great episodes of Star Trek, to come up with something that would be able to stand alongside City on the Edge of Forever. And so to be able to do both Far Beyond the Stars and then do World Enough in Time with George and with Christina Moses, who's now on A Million Little Things on ABC. It was just, and Yeoman Rand. I got to have Grace Lee Whitney in it, and Majel Barrett played the computer voice, which I think was the last thing she did as an actress, and she died not long after. These are great honors. To be able to take something, the challenge of Star Trek, as I saw it, was to take something profoundly truthful from your own life and put it through the lens of Star Trek, so you can move and change and inspire millions of people around the world. And the fact that World Enough in Time got nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula, which are the two big awards in science fiction was very meaningful to me. And so I love Star Trek, and I saw the transformative power that it could have in the world. So for me, it was a very great honor and a huge responsibility, but one I welcomed. So yeah, that's how I viewed it.
What about you, Toni?
I look at some of the stories we came up with, and I mean, for me, I'm not sure any of ours had any, message or anything like that. I think ours were just taking characters we liked and, highlighting them and having fun with them, because I have to say, like, especially with Little Green Men, I wasn't a fan of Ferengis at all. I was just like, why? But, what changed is Quark. I mean, Armin Shimmer, I mean, his Quark and Rom and Nog, I mean, they became like my favorite characters.
Yeah.
And I think at least for me, I'm not sure with Jack, but I just like taking some of those characters and doing things with them. And, I don't know. That's what I liked. I don't know. Jack, help me.
Jack?
Well, yeah, we. I usually tried to put in some kind of morality play or message or something, and Toni would be like, "Do we have to have it? I mean, do we have to have it?" And I said, "No, we don't have to, but let's put it in there anyway. If they don't like it, they can take it out."
Yeah.
So sometimes, like Little Green Men, I don't think there was a morality play in there, except other than don't be greedy.
Yes.
Right.
Great, but it's great.
We would concentrate on the supporting cast. Try to come up with stories for them, because everybody would pitch a Cisco story or a Janeway story or a Picard story. We tried to, focus in on the characters, and then those characters would come in and interact with the main characters.
Yeah.
So we paired up Gul Dukat with Kira Nerys.
Yeah.
And then we had the Ferengi guys, an episode, which was specifically, about them.
Mm-hmm. And this also works very well because from a production side, speaking as a producer, when you're shooting a season of a show, and on Star Trek it might have been 22, 26 in a year or whatever, it's a lot, and your actors get very tired. And so when you have an episode that allows some of the actors to take a few days off or a week off, that's a great opportunity, because again, it allows you to kind of get them rested, so that then if you do an episode that has a major role for like Cisco, like Far Beyond the Stars did, they're up to it because they've gotten the rest from the episode that had Armin and the Ferengi taking the brunt. It's funny because the characters on Star Trek are so juicy, and I remember when I first saw Armin on the DS9 pilot, my friend Les Landau was a director on the show, and I said, I want to meet that guy. And so he took me onto the DS9 set, and there was Armin in what he called the full Ferengi drag with the head and everything. And I just said, you're great. I said, I'm a producer and I'm going to hire you. And later I did hire him on a number of shows. And he said, you're the only producer who ever made that promise and kept it.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
Real quick, one thing Mark said was the Ferengi were very brunt. And I just thought that was pretty cool. For you Star Trek nerds out there, there is a Ferengi called Brunt, played by Jeff Combs. So I thought that was cool. And as Cirroc knows, when Avery Brooks would get a little bit of free time, or like an episode that really wasn't about him, he wouldn't take a week off. He would direct that episode. And that's when he would come in and actually direct. But Steve, same question to you that Cirroc posed.
I just such a big Star Trek fan my whole life, since I was 5-6 years old. The idea of having my name permanently associated with Star Trek, that's really where my motivation came from. I wasn't trying to come up with any one particular type of story. I wasn't really trying to tell stories about me or anything, with my life. Just wanted to come up with something unique that, as Mark had mentioned earlier, that they hadn't heard before.
Yeah, yeah. But that's the fun part, because Star Trek allowed such a variety of stories, from like Trouble with Tribbles to Sea on the Edge of Forever, when with the original show, that it's that variety that makes the show fun, because you can have the Roswell show, or the heavier ones or whatever, the inner light. You know, it has such a range. The universe of Star Trek allows such an enormous variety of stories. That's one of the things that makes it great. And I think Michael Piller realized that by having in, you know, like a few hundred freelancers a year, because they were taking pitches every single day, you know, in the afternoons, that allowed an enormous amount of new ideas to come in. And that's really what, because a writing staff can get very stale, and they've told all their stories. But when a freelancer comes in, there's always that possibility they'll come up with something that you never would have come up with. And that's why they really were grateful to all of us who came in from the outside in that way, because it enriched the show and made it better.
Right, of course. What about you, Ethan?
I don't know that I set out to do anything like that, although, and it was, most of the time it was like, whoa, hey, what if this happens? But I think in the development of that, like Children of Time, they go back and meet their descendants. Well, then what do they do with them? That's where the issues come in, and how they deal with it, and should they save themselves, or should they sacrifice themselves to save the colony, things like that.
Right.
Once you get that spark, then you start developing the story, and I think all that starts to come out.
Yeah.
You know, I got to admit though, when Steve was giving his answer, I was like, that would have been my answer too. Like, I just want to see my name. I just want to see my name under Star Trek, and I'll be happy.
Yeah.
But here's the question I've been really sitting on for this entire panel. This is what I've been wanting to ask you guys weeks ago when we first were going to do this thing. And we'll start with Mr. Jack Trevino. What is, in your opinion, your favorite or best idea or pitch that did not get picked up? Or two, if you can't narrow it down to one.
Well, we did have that Jake and Molly story. We really liked that, and we thought the dynamics of all the characters were going to be turned topsy-turvy, and apparently they had someone in-house that had already pitched a similar story, and I think they wound up doing that episode. But in that version, Molly was a wild child, and so it was a good story, but it was just different from ours. But we thought ours obviously would have been better, and we sold a third story called Quorum, which was a courtroom, jury room story, and in it, every character, a secret had to be revealed, because in the episode, Garrick was going to convince everybody that a character, or not a character, that a person was guilty, and he knew that he wasn't. He knew he was innocent, but for whatever reason, he had to convince everybody that this guy was guilty. So during the course of the episode, something is revealed about the character.
Wow, that's really cool.
They bought the story, and I think because we saw little bits and pieces of it, that kernels that they took and developed into other stories. I think like, or the battle to be strong. I think, is that the one where Jake was kind of why he was a writer? He thought he was a coward, and so we called them up and we said, "Hey, you know, we're seeing some of these ideas," and they went, "Yeah, we paid you for it. We can do whatever you want with it." And we were like, "Well, that's right." That's right. So they owned that story, and they owned all the ideas. So they just took it and developed episodes out of that.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
They kind of chopped the episode up into different pieces and placed it in other episodes.
Well, I think they took concepts from the episode,
Right.
and developed them further.
Yeah, that's really cool. If one were a Writers Guild member, one probably could have gone to the guild and said, "Hey, look, I sold a story that was going to be for one episode, and they've used it in 5. Let's discuss this." But but again, you don't want to piss into the stream. You don't want to muddy the waters, where you always want to have when they hear your name, you want them to all say, "Yeah, let's have him back in." So that's why you don't rock the boat. But yeah, right. Absolutely, that's great.
Tony, was the one with Jake and Molly your favorite that was not picked up?
There was that one, and there was one, and I guess actually this one has a moral. I can't remember if I pitched it with you, Jack, or my previous partner, Donna. But it was about with Bashir, this entourage came in, and he had like younger versions that kind of resembled him. And it turns out that they were like his clones. And whenever something happened to them, because they were a big wig in their society, like if he lost an arm, you know, one of the clones would lose their arm because they would replace it with them. That was their whole purpose. And Bashir falls in love with one of them, and something happens where they need the organ that's going to kill her, or kill, you know, they need to kill her, and he won't do it. And they're like, you know, we can't judge that society. That's how they are. You know, we're ordering you to do it. He won't do it, and then she ends up doing something and kills herself.
Wow.
So the organ can be transplanted, and he had to do it. But they considered that kind of dark.
That's okay. We like dark.
They're called The Quality of Mercy.
Oh yeah. So it was
Quality
with you.
of Mercy.
Yeah.
Wow. What about you, Ethan? What's your favorite or two that you just still to this day you wish it would have been picked up?
I had one for Voyager that I pitched to Brandon Braga, and he liked it a lot. It never, I don't know, got past him or got past the group or whatever. But they found somewhere on a planet, they find this some kind of device, whether it's a pyramid or whatever, that has all these little facets to it. And you can download your memories to it. So you can replay memories and see things in your past and relive them the way they were. And then people started, you know, seeing bad memories and started, ooh, I don't like that. I want to forget that. So they would get rid of that facet, but then it also erased it from their own mind. And everybody started becoming a worse person, not a better person, but their personality, they were just worse. And the whole deal was, you know, your bad experiences make you as much as your good experiences do. And so then they all start trying to retrieve the little facets and put themselves back together. So that was kind of my favorite that almost made it, but not quite.
That's really cool. Who were the leads in that episode?
I'm trying to remember. It sort of affected everybody. There was, of course, one person, maybe I think it was Neelix, that decided, you know, he didn't want anything to do with it. So he was the only sane one of the group that kind of figured out what was going on and kind of got everything back together.
Wow. Neelix saved the day, huh?
Underrepresented.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ethan, I think you gave me my excuse for Judgment Day. I'm going to say all the bad things I did made me a better person. Can I?
See? Yeah.
Can I get a pass?
Yeah.
That's funny. What about you, Steve?
Well, Cirroc, you'll probably be able to identify with this.
Nice.
We all agree how incredible of an actor Andrew Robinson is.
Absolutely.
So I pitched a Garak story to Ron Moore, DS9, of course. And the basic gist of the story was that Garak was on the promenade, and he sees this guy drinking something, sitting at one of the tables, and it was somebody that he assassinated some years earlier who was a member of the Obsidian Order. And they ended up hunting each other down in the bowels of the space station, areas where we had never been before on Deep Space Nine. And that was another one of those that came so close to selling. So close.
How did that resolve itself? That definitely sounds like one where everybody that's watching this is like leaning in a little closer.
Yeah, who the heck remembers how it resolved?
If you don't buy it, you don't get the end.
Yeah. Wow.
But Andrew Robinson, I thought I really wanted to see an episode that was really zoomed in on him and some spooky, the whole, my mindset the whole time was, how can I make this story like really spooky? And his character, obviously very conducive for doing something like that.
I was going to say that one time Toni and I pitched this idea where the Voyager crew goes to this planet, and when they get there, everybody's dressed like Janeway or Tuvok or Neelix. Well, there weren't too many Neelixes. But the whole planet they were all dressed up like the Voyager. They had been picking up their transmissions. The whole society was was Voyager. And it was a play on the conventions
Yes.
where everybody dresses up. And I can't remember who it was, but she told us, no, we cannot make fun of Star Trek fans. They would not accept that.
I think that's a great idea, actually.
Well, about a year later, Galaxy Quest came out.
Yes.
And the Star Trek fans loved it.
Yeah. Whoops.
And I think we talked to him and said, hey, remember this? Never mind. Don't worry about it.
Well, and Tony's idea sounded a lot like The Island.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
What was The Island? Which one was that?
The clone movie.
The movie
God,
Jude Law and
oh God,
Jude
was
Law,
it?
right?
Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, Scarlett
Yeah.
Johansson. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mark, did you have a favorite that was not picked up?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because as I mentioned, there was that folder of 200 ideas, and I'll have to read it someday. I can't remember all that stuff, but I'll tell you my two favorite unmade Star Trek stories because I co-wrote with Michael Reeves World Enough in Time, the Sulu episode, and the way that came about was in the 70s they were going to bring Star Trek back as a TV series called Star Trek Phase 2, and they got the entire cast of Shatner, DeForest Kelley, everybody except for Nimoy because he was involved in a lawsuit over merchandising. So they cast a different actor to play a Vulcan. But Michael Reeves went in at that time, and he pitched the Sulu story, which we ultimately ended doing on Star Trek New Voyages. But he also pitched a great Dr. McCoy story, which was, McCoy's a widower, and his wife died decades ago. And it turns out that unbeknownst to him, she was cloned, and a woman's grown up, and she's a scientist who's been assigned to the Enterprise to do a research project. And so McCoy has to work with her. And she, of course, has no memory or identity as his wife, and yet here is his wife again alive. And it was a really interesting story. Cool. And that never got made. And then the other story, it was really interesting because when Star Trek New Voyages was up and running, the fan franchise, and then of course Star Trek Continues came into existence. I was at some event with Richard Matheson and George Clayton Johnson, both of whom wrote for the original Star Trek. And Matheson said to me, it's funny, last night I had a dream, and I dreamed a Star Trek episode, and it was called The Death of Kirk. And I said, well, did you write it down? And he said, no, because, there's nowhere to sell it. And I thought, oh, Jesus, if he'd written it down, Star Trek New Voyages would have loved to have done it. And it would have been another Matheson Star Trek story because he did, The Enemy Within. And so that was one that got away. And I would love to know what that story was. It sounded really interesting. And of course, he was one of the great writers of all time.
And then he wrote for Star Trek 7 Generations.
Interesting.
Well, no, I don't know. It's just because that's when Kirk died.
That famous Ryan Husk humor.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll keep that one to myself next time. But that did remind me, speaking of the fan productions, Ethan and Jack, you guys combined superpowers to write initially Star Trek of Gods and Men and later Star Trek Renegades. Can you guys walk us through that process? And then Jack has also promised to share with us a Cirroc Lofton ear story that I'll let you kind of just move into that organically.
Well, we were contacted by Jack Marshall, who was with New Voyages at the time, and said he had a producer that wanted to come up with a movie, a Star Trek movie, because I think it was the 40th anniversary was coming up pretty soon, and Paramount didn't really have any express an interest in doing something. So we came up with a whole bunch of ideas and stuff, and we go back and forth. And then Jack Marshall said, well, the producer didn't like it. And I said, well, I told Ethan, I'm going to call this guy, find out what was it?
What's his damn problem?
Yeah.
So we called him up, Sky Conway,
right.
And he said, well, for one thing, you lied. You said you were script writers. And I said, no, we were story writers. We never lied. But he was testing us to see if we were going to, stand up, for ourselves. And we did. And so he said, I have this one idea that I want to do, and can you make it work? And so I think we put it together, in about 3 or 4 months?
Yeah, something like that. And the reason the producer called, or the reason Jack Marshall called us is because we had written a script for New Voyages that I think at the time was just too big for them, but because they liked it, that's how we got connected with Sky through Jack.
Wow. So then one day, so Cirroc's role was a half Vulcan, right? I believe he played Nichelle Nichols' character's son, right?
Son. Mm-hmm.
And then, all right, Jack. So I've led you to it. Can you tell us the story?
They said Cirroc left the set and he took his ears with him. He said, "I'm gonna wear these ears and see if anybody notices." I think you went to a nightclub or something, because the next day we were asking you, and did they notice?
Yeah, I got a lot of looks with those ears, and I actually still have those ears. I wrapped them up in some saran wrap, and you got to keep them moist. But I still,
you looked good in those ears.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I mean, that was a pleasure. That was just a real pleasure, especially getting a chance to work alongside Nichelle Nichols and being directed by Tim Russ. I mean, it was really just a magical moment, especially that day. I can remember, being in the house when we were filming that one scene, and it was just a warm feeling, just, being there, looking around, having an opportunity to work with the great Nichelle Nichols from such legendary status, it was an honor for me.
And then Jack and Ethan, you guys went on with the same producer, Sky Conway, to write Star Trek Renegades, which is where I met the two of you when I worked on that crew. You guys want to walk us through that? Was that like Sky had an idea and he threw it at you guys, or you guys pitched the idea to him? How'd that come about?
I think it was.
It was the last day. It was the last day of filming.
That's right.
In Laurel Canyon Studio.
Of Gods and Men?
Said, I don't want this to end. I wish we could keep doing this. I'm having so much fun. He said, but I want to do a new series or a new project after this, still Star Trek. But he said, I want this thing to be completely different. So I walked away, and the setting it looked like a jail, this particular set. And I don't know why, I just thought of the Dirty Dozen meet Star Trek.
Wow.
So I thought, what if all these characters that they had to interact with were like the Dirty Dozen? They had to go on this mission where it's a suicide mission.
Wow.
And then I thought Chekhov could be the guy that organizes them. So that's how you would pull them in, and then we would have to, advance it into the next generation era.
That's fun.
Wow.
That's great.
Yeah, that was a great time. Ethan, did you have a favorite aspect or character of because you guys, there was Tim Russ, there was obviously Gary Graham and Walter Koenig and Adrian Wilkinson of Xena. I mean, it was just like Sean Young. There was Robert Picardo, Edward Furlong. I mean, it just kind of went on forever. Grant Imahara and Herb Jefferson. Anyway, I could just keep going. Did you have a favorite?
I don't know. It's we had all these roles, and part of it was trying to raise money to shoot it, and who could we get that will generate Kickstarter money for us? What if we get so and so? Okay, now how do we write a part for that person? Where do we bring that character in? So a little bit of it was like that. We had the Nausicaan at the very beginning. I kind of like that character, although we killed him immediately.
Right.
And I don't know. It's really hard. It's really hard. Gary Graham, his character, but I think that's a little because he's just such a fun guy to be around, and so it's just enjoyed the time with him, and maybe the character and he kind of blended a little bit.
It seems like Gary Graham's character Ragnar was the only character you guys invented that wasn't already in the Star Trek series that went on from Of Gods and Men over to Star Trek Renegades. He was the only one.
Right, from the one to the other. Yes.
Sky told us, look, I want Ragnar in it. So
okay.
Shifter, so he didn't age.
Yeah.
Stayed the same.
Well, here's a question I want to ask Steve. because I have a feeling he's got an answer for this, and I could be wrong. I bet Mark's got an answer for it too. Steve, did you ever have a Star Trek series idea? Like not just for like an episode, but just an idea for an actual series that you always thought would be a great one?
No, not that I can remember. I may have, but nothing that I can remember. I was obviously so focused in on trying to sell a story, you know, the series thing was, I think I maybe subconsciously knew the odds of somebody like me, you know, pitching a series. You know, people who sell series obviously have a much more extensive background than I did. So it wasn't something that I was really pondering at all.
Was one of the 4 series that you pitched to the most open to you?
I'm sorry?
Was one of the 4 series that you pitched to, did they seem more open than the others? Was there one?
No.
Wow.
And there were some producers that I ended up pitching in multiple series. But no, I didn't. I think, you know, my answer to that would be, yeah, the story that Jack and I almost sold to Enterprise. We had probably 4 or 5 meetings with Andre Bormanis regarding this story, and he was very excited about it.
Cool.
And that was a great experience. Working with Jack, as Ethan and Toni, I'm sure, can attest to, is a fantastic experience. He's very open-minded. He's nice and even-keeled. He's not in a lot of writers, I think, are up and down, and they get in their moods, and don't get that a lot with Jack Trevino. So that's a very nice thing.
How much did I say I was going to give you to say that?
Yeah, a couple of hundred.
Okay.
Couple of 250, I think it was.
Okay.
Most writers, it just depends on when the medication kicks in, you know. But to answer your question, Ryan, yeah, actually, when we did World Enough in Time for Star Trek New Voyages, that was essentially, we viewed that as a pilot for a Captain Sulu series, because that's if ever there was a show that should have been made, it was that one. I mean, when the moment George was in Star Trek 6 and showed what he could do as a captain, what he could be as a captain, it was so obvious and so not utilized, because he was always one of my favorite actors, one of my favorite characters.
We also got a hint of it on Voyager too. Of him as a captain, right?
Yeah, but so what we did was Michael Reeves and I, you know, Michael's an Emmy winner, and he wrote for Next Gen, and he wrote for and he story edited Batman the Animated Series and produced Gargoyles. We worked up a 2-hour pilot and a series Bible for Captain Sulu series, and I went in and pitched it to CBS, and it was very interesting because at the meeting it was very friendly. The executive was really nice. It was very clear to me that he had the meeting because he was just kind of interested in what I would do with that show. And they had no interest in doing a Captain Sulu series. It was obvious that CBS/Paramount was never going to do that show. And but it was really fun to play in those fields. And then when I came up with Space Command, the idea was to come up with something that would have that same quality of a hopeful future and be inspiring, like Star Trek had inspired me. And the fans have given me, it's closing in on $2 million now, and that allowed me to open a studio and roll camera. And one thing that we've been kind of talking about, but I think we really again have to reiterate, is these actors from Star Trek are so wonderful, and you included, you know, Cirroc. But I mean, to be able to work with Nichelle Nichols or George Takei, your heroes, you know, these are your heroes, or Armin Shimmerman or Ethan Phillips or Doug Jones, for God's sake. He's in Space Command too, you know that, Ryan. And these are phenomenal.
I do.
These are phenomenal actors, and they're often underutilized. I mean, when I first met Doug Jones, I said, look, I'm going to write something where we get to see your face, because he has such an amazing face, and it's always under, you know, prosthetics. And you know, just again, it's such an honor. Robert Picardo, I mean, what a jewel, you know, to work with. I mean, what fun. And so to be able, and again, when we were talking about how Hollywood's changed, when you mentioned that, Steve, it has changed. And so I just decided to completely skip the studio and network, you know, hamster wheel, and just go directly to my audience. And that's worked extremely well. I have my own YouTube channel, and millions of people around the world have been watching, you know, what I've been coming up with. And now I'm going to be creating 6 new shows, and off we go with that. So it's, you know, it's pretty cool. It's really fun. I love the
You
new.
need any writers?
Start pitching. Start throwing ideas. Tony's sitting on 3 ideas right now.
Not yet, but down the line there's the possibility. So definitely keep in touch. And
Cool.
you know, because I love working with other writers, and I love working with talented actors. And one of the shows I'm creating is with Rockne O'Bannon, who of course, you know, created Farscape, Defiance, and Alien.
Yeah, I love Farscape.
Yeah, and he and I have known each other since the Twilight Zone. When they rebooted Twilight Zone, I wrote for that show, and he story edited it. And we've been wanting to create a show together ever since, and so now we are, and that's
Cool. Very
really
cool.
fun.
Well, I think, Cirroc, we can't hear you.
Look out.
Cirroc, we can't hear you. There we go.
Hello.
What
Can
did
you
you
hear me?
say, Cirroc? Yeah.
No, I was just pitching my Michael Jordan script to Mark.
Sorry, we can't hear you anymore. I don't know what happened.
Hello, is anyone there?
Okay.
Well, if I was going to react as a TV producer, I'd say, well, could it be hockey instead?
Yeah, sure. Let me ask if Michael Jordan plays hockey. I'll find out.
So I think we're just about out of time here, guys, but this has been really cool. It's a lot of fun. I feel like, I know Cirroc feels the same way with this, but I feel like we could ask each one of you like so many questions. Like, what's it like to meet Rick Berman? Or like, how nervous were you and how did you get through your nerves? So we might have to do this again sometime, because there are still people that want to learn how to pitch.
Yes.
And I'm sure you guys can give all different kinds of advice, whether you pitched 100 times or whether you just nailed a couple. You know, I mean, there's a lot of advice to be given. So rather than leaving right now, how about in 2 minutes, everybody give us like 20-second piece of advice for anybody that does want to pitch, if that's okay, now that I've talked myself into it. What do you think, Jack?
Well, you mentioned Rick Berman. We asked if we could see Rick Berman, and it was like asking to see the Wizard of Oz. Nobody got to see the wizard.
Yeah.
He's
But
behind the curtain.
And advice, just, you know, keep at it. You know, don't let anybody dissuade you. You know, you have a good idea, and you know it'll come out. You know, just keep pitching.
What about you, Tony?
Same thing. I mean, you just, my thing is you got to try. That's the biggest thing I got out of this is, you know, even the submitting your original spec script, you know, you're going against thousands of people, and a lot of people were, you know, kind of doubting it ever get seen, but they're never going to see it if you don't even submit it.
Yes.
So my thing is just try, you know, and because what is it? I always tell my kids, you can't score if you don't shoot.
Nice.
Yep.
Steve?
First off, Ryan, kudos to you. I think you did a great job hosting this here
Oh,
tonight.
thanks. What about Cirroc? He was
Absolutely.
pretty good too, right?
No, I think Ryan did a great job. Good job, Steve.
No, thank
Kudos to Cirroc as well. Yes.
Thank you, Steve.
I think it's important that if you want to be a story person and maybe pitch, just make sure that you write everything down.
Uh-huh.
I find people think that they can remember everything. It's not as easy as you might think it is to recall stuff. So you get an idea, don't waste any time, write it down. And from a guy who pitched for 10 years, almost 10 years, and didn't sell and just kept getting back up and doing it again, just be persistent. That's the key. Be persistent.
You know, very quickly, writing it down, every single person nodded when you said that, because that's like what all right. I mean, you've got to write it down. And I've got a friend, Mr. Michael Kenyon Rosenberg, shout out to him, who's running our second stage, the Rene Aubergenois stage for Virtual Trek Con. And that was like his biggest thing. Anytime you say anything, he just goes, write it down. Like almost like, stop telling me, just hurry up and write it down before you forget it. And while we're giving shout outs, I have to do this because we mentioned Star Trek Renegades, and Rico E. Anderson will be very angry if I don't say also starring Rico E. Anderson.
Okay.
Anyway, those of you that know him.
The contract thing.
It is. It's an intimidation thing. What about you, Ethan?
Just keep writing. You get, the more you write, the better you get. I look back at stuff I wrote years and years ago and I went, oh God, what is that? You know, and it's like, I thought it was great at the time. So I think you just get better, you know, the more you write, and just, again, like everybody else said, keep at it.
Right. And we've had some great conversations with you, Ethan, by the way, on our show. So
Thank you.
you've a lot of people really enjoyed your time with us. They've got a lot of great comments about it.
Thank you.
Sure. Now, Mark, one piece of advice that's very similar to write it down is what you have on your computer right there that says, don't think, do, if I remember correctly.
That's right. And that was from Ray Bradbury. That was the sign he had over his typewriter. And he was a dear friend and mentor. And the whole idea is don't overthink things. Just, go. His motto of writing was vomit, then mop. So I agree with. But
a bucket and a mop, right, Cirroc?
Yeah.
The lyrics to a song. Never mind.
Yeah. In terms of coming up with stories and pitching and selling and all of that, first of all, years ago I started an animation, and someone once asked me if I wrote for the children in the audience, and I said no, I write for the child in myself. And so I'm always coming up with stuff that entertains me. If it entertains me, I trust that it will entertain my audience. And so never pitch anything that you don't. Never pitch from cynicism. Always pitch from enthusiasm, from joy, from like, what would I love to see on the air? What would be so cool? And it can be a completely crazy story, like, oh, the frigate crashed in Roswell, which is wonderful. I mean, again, it's like whatever works. And then the other thing is, the other thing I wanted to say is, and we all feel this, of course, I knew, like, for instance, when I sold World Enough in Time, the Far Beyond the Stars, and I had that lunch at Nick Adele's with the entire writing staff. This is before it was even written. And we all knew it was going to be one of the great Star Trek episodes. We just knew. And to know, to be part of Star Trek, to have something that is so enriched and entertained all of us on the receiving end, and then to be able to have, as you said, to have your name on it and have people watching it. Here we are, how many years later, how many decades later, and still people are loving it, still people are being moved by it, still people are laughing at the jokes and being entertained. I mean, when they screened Far Beyond the Stars at the Star Trek convention 2 years ago, it was astonishing how it was even more current and relevant now than even when it was made. And I'm very proud of the work I did for that show. I'm really glad I got the opportunity.
Right. Cirroc and I mention that all the time. When we're watching Deep Space Nine, it's just more relevant today even than when it was shot and initially aired. Cirroc, any last words for us?
Well, I'm not a successful writer, but I played one on television.
That's true.
So I just want to echo you guys' sentiment. And I think that, those kinds of being persistent and staying focused on your craft can really apply to almost any career that you choose. But writing things down and being clear about your ideas is really helpful when you're going in under the stress and scrutiny of people that also do this for a living and are looking to be under the time of a clock. So you have management of clock and time, and you want to make sure your ideas are as clear and concise as possible. That would be my only advice.
That's awesome.
Great.
Well, we've reached the end of the road, boys to men. We do want to say thank you very much to Mr. Jack Trevino, Ethan Calk, Steve Fratt.
Either way.
Toni Marberry, Mr. Marc Zicree. Thank you so much, guys. I know that we're getting dangerously close to Jack and Tony's episode, so maybe we'll be seeing you shortly on the Deep Space Nine show.
25th anniversary.
Good.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Already.
Wow, yeah. Little green man.
Well, thank you all very much. And for everybody else at home, I guess we'll see you on the next one.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.